Trump tweeted a video of Jeffrey Sachs calling Netanyahu a deep, dark son of a bitch. That's a pretty strong statement. And then we also have word that Trump is setting up a meeting with Putin. So have you changed your mind on Trump and these two conflicts?
Um, well, I would say not at all on the Russian conflict, the Ukraine-Russian war. For the reasons that I laid out. I think, Trump really does want to end it, but I think he just can't. I mean, there's just no offer that he can make, a politically viable, from a domestic U.S. perspective offer that he can make that the Russians can accept. I think that just hasn't changed. And then also we've pointed out, for example, that the Russians really, at this point, are unlikely to believe anything that the Americans say. Even if they believe Trump personally, they see what happens. There'll be somebody else in office in 4 years, and quite likely that president will ignore, or very, very possibly. So anyway, we've spoken of the reasons that
Well, just real quick though,
yeah,
doesn't Trump have the option to just walk away? Just say,
yeah,
that's it. No more
yeah,
money. No.
but we've spoken about that too. That he could do, and I think he should do. But he will pay a cost for it. He'll pay a very high price, and that is that the loss of the war will be pinned on him. It will be unfair. So this is why I'm hoping against hope that the Russians, make some really monumental breakthrough before he takes that step. And maybe that will happen, to the point where it's just nobody can ignore it. Oh man, the Russians are they're steamrolling the Ukrainians. It's all over, and nobody can hide it. And if that happens, then it would be easier for him to pull the plug, because he could say, look, they lost it before I did this. But if that doesn't happen, he pulls the plug, the Ukrainians lose, which is going to happen anyway. But their loss will then be blamed on him. All the blame will be pinned on Trump, and I don't think he can risk that. I don't think he's willing to do that. So I don't think this has changed at all on the Russian side. Now it's interesting. Okay? Go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to try to push back a little bit more. I mean, do you think that Trump cares so much? Like when you say the blame is going to be put on him, the blame by who? Like I think the mainstream media has attacked Trump nonstop for 10 years. It's just been a constant circus of Trump news. So I don't know if Trump really cares about being blamed so much. And I think he could potentially convey the message to the American people and the Western people, because it seems like people in Western Europe and in the US are becoming less and less favorable towards this war. So they might just, and maybe they would be happy with it, and he's able to get that message out. Sure, he'll be attacked viciously by the mainstream media and the deep state, but Trump has kind of built himself as that anti-mainstream media, anti-deep state candidate. So it might just be like, I don't care what these guys say about me. Isn't that possible?
That is possible. But I would just say, on the other hand, if you look at the kind of people that he's appointed, they're all hawks, and and really the way they talk about the war is really no different from the way that Blinken and Biden's men and women talked about the war. He's surrounded himself with the same people, and I think also Trump does not like to be perceived as weak, and that's what they're going to call him. They say, "Oh, he was weak. Biden was tough, and Trump is giving up. He's surrendering to the Russians." And but you may be right. It may be that he's now in. He already showed a certain amount of, let's say, imperviousness to mainstream criticism, and I think that probably that trend has continued, and maybe it's reached the point where he can get away with something like that. I hope you're right. It's not impossible. I agree. You just might be right. Again, that's something, like I say, that he's not going to make a deal with the Russians. I don't see how that's going to happen, even if he really tries. But he, like you say, he could walk away. And the question is he will pay some kind of price. He will come under severe attack Is he willing to do that? Is he willing to risk that? I don't think so, but I'd be glad to be proved wrong.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just a bit more of an optimist. I think it just comes with being youthful.
Yeah,
But but yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. I really hope so. I mean, the thing is often, the argument you make, I think, is very rational, and it would apply well to basically any political candidate. But I think Trump is not fully, he's not
yeah,
a
he's
typical
yeah.
political candidate.
That's
So
true.
he
That's
could,
true. That's the thing. Well, we'll get to we'll discuss this further. Trump's personality when we talk about his
right. So
relationship with Netanyahu.
right, that's a
Yeah.
good segue. So, Netanyahu and Trump, they seemed like buddy buddy. When Trump won, I saw the Zionist Twitter space, erupt with glee. Like, we got our man. Trump is going to protect Israel and get the job done and show force and strength. And it just seemed like, well, it didn't seem great with Biden. It just felt like if you were a part of the Axis of Resistance or Palestinians, it's just like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't when it comes to U.S. presidents. But and it seemed like, if anything, that Trump
Maybe
was
worse.
more Zionist.
Right.
But all of a sudden, things have changed. So maybe you can just talk about if you believe things have changed and why they
Uh-huh.
have between Trump and Netanyahu and everything
Yeah.
in the Middle East.
Okay. Well, there may not be anything to it, but the talk of the rift, I think probably is based on something real. We had, of course, you showed that video clip of Jeffrey Sachs, and you mentioned that, and to my knowledge, Trump still hasn't taken that down, and I think that's got to mean something. You can see Trump putting something up without really even thinking about it completely, or maybe not even watching the whole thing. I think he's a very impulsive kind of guy. But the fact that this has actually now appeared in the news, that the Israelis are definitely talking about it, and he still got it up there. That makes me think, okay, maybe this was a deliberate insult directed at Netanyahu. And then we also have the fact, Trump's inauguration's upcoming. It's a week from now, a week from today. And Netanyahu will not be attending. Now, they gave as an excuse the ICC warrant. What they said is that, well, let's see, if there's some sort of mechanical failure and the plane was forced to land in a European country, then Netanyahu would be at risk of arrest.
Do you think that's true?
It's possible. You can't say that it's, but it just seems highly unlikely.
The Americans would not allow it,
Yeah,
if it
that's the
landed in a
thing.
European country.
That's the thing. It's like, even if it did happen, I think it was like the Americans would just make it extra clear. You're not going to board that plane. He's on the way to, and just knowing the Europeans, they just wouldn't risk it. I don't think so. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true. I think and people have pointed out that in general, heads of state, from foreign countries don't attend inaugurations. But again, Israel is different. Netanyahu is different. And this was a chance for him to celebrate, the coming of his new ally, and maybe also to lay the groundwork for an upcoming attack. So there may really be a rift. Now, okay, let's first of all set out like the facts that Trump is a Zionist, and he's been very closely allied with Netanyahu. I mean, in his first term, he approved, the moving of the American embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized the annexation of the Golan Heights. He pushed it through or nearly succeeded in pushing through the Abraham Accords, which would have normalized relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and also, I believe, UAE. Those were major breakthroughs, major gifts to Israel that previous presidents had not, given.
And also, just to add to it, the tearing up of the JCPOA for
Yeah.
and also the
Is it?
assassination of Soleimani.
Yeah, JCPOA and
Oh,
yeah,
JCPOA, right?
yeah, right, and yeah, right, and the fact that yeah, he also has shared the Israeli hatred of Iran. Yeah, he seems to legitimately hate the Iranian government for some reason, um, in a way that he doesn't seem to hate any other government in the world. He's willing to, talk to Kim Jong Un and so on and so forth, but. And then let's not forget that, during the campaign, he set himself as like a Zionist. He presented himself as a Zionist and continually attacked the Democrats. Here's Biden and it's just done bent over backwards and given the Israelis everything. I think it was 22 billion and now another 8 billion on top of that in military aid, and then been, completely complicit in the genocide. But he's basically like a Hamas supporter or
Yeah, he
something.
called him a
Yeah,
Palestinian.
yeah, right. So,
It's,
it's, yeah, let's not forget any of that. And then the fact that the number one donor, okay, to the Trump campaign was the Adelson family, Miriam Adelson. And I think it's $100 million. So, they gave him that money because they feel like he's going to do, work for them.
and
He's going to carry out, and the next big thing, he's already moved the embassy. He's already recognized, the Golan Heights. I think they're looking for recognition of the West Bank and an attack on Iran. And I think that's, probably what I wouldn't be surprised if he promised those things. So let's not forget any of that. But there's, one thing is that Trump is different from other politicians, like you were saying. Um, I would say like every other Western leader and every, American president, well, let's say ever since maybe Ronald Reagan, um, has been basically an empty suit. I would say it's just a creature of the establishment, somebody with a very weak personality. Well, I wouldn't say Clinton has a weak personality, but he was fundamentally part of the establishment. Okay, and I'm not saying that the ones before were anti-establishment, but they did, I think they had stronger personalities. Let's just put it that way, and they could occasionally just say no and go their own way. Now, people like Biden, Keir Starmer, Olaf Scholz, these people just can't say no. They're just establishment creatures. That's why they rose to the top. Macron's a little different. He talks occasionally, kind of like goes, kind of wanders off the plantation with his musings about different things. But when it comes to action, he's always a creature of the establishment. He never goes against the establishment. And that's just true of every Western leader. It just is, with the exception, of course, of the dissidents, Fico and Orban. And it's, occasionally maybe we see it in Meloni. We do see some signs of dissidence, but the leaders of all the major countries have very weak personalities, and they just never surprise us. They always do what the establishment wants. Occasionally, it's against their own better instincts. They think, maybe this doesn't really make sense, but they're telling me to do this. I got to do this. And we know that Biden really actually hated Netanyahu, but he always, just he kept his grumblings and his cursing, private, and always went along with the Israelis. And that's been true of previous presidents of Obama and Bush too. I think actually everybody's had differences, real serious differences, or really private differences with Netanyahu. He is universally disliked. There was a hot mic incident. I think it was Sarkozy and Obama, where they're talking about Netanyahu. I just can't stand the guy. He got out, but both of them always did his bit. Publicly they were just always couldn't meet his demands fast enough. Now Trump, I think, is a different creature. He doesn't have that weak personality. He has a strong personality. He's he's going to be chaotic and kind of unpredictable too. So it was something that I know I mentioned in an earlier program. It's just that, I mean, he's shown himself to be very closely allied with Netanyahu in all his policies. But, when Netanyahu backstabs him, he might not take it the way that previous American presidents have taken it. They just accept it. Yeah, he might be the sort of person who just says that, that's SOB, I'm going to, I'm going to show him. And maybe that's what happened. I wouldn't be surprised if Netanyahu hasn't already done something to anger him, broken a promise, and he's mad. But let's also keep in mind that he's got all these commitments to Israel and against Iran, and those haven't gone away. So I think there may be a rift, but whether this actually has real policy consequences, that's a separate issue. And I think probably it won't, almost certainly it won't. It may be temporary, that may, but there are all those his own motivations, his own, and those of the promises that he's made to people like the Adelsons and the kind of people that he's put around. He's put extreme Iran warhawks around him. So I'm afraid that we're still going to see an attack on Iran. But with Trump, it was like, again with these other leaders, there's just no chance that he'll say no in a big way. Other leaders will say no, but Trump just, I have to admit, he just might. He is a kind of as Mark Sloboda says, a chaos agent. And so there is always a chance, where I don't think there was ever a chance. I think Biden eventually was going to go along with whatever Netanyahu decided to do. And the same would have been true of Kamala Harris. But Trump just might say, hey, to hell with you. I'm not doing this anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think Trump was also a bit slighted by Netanyahu when the previous election, when Biden beat Trump. Netanyahu was pretty quick to congratulate Biden on his victory, and Trump was still trying to say that he was president. So I think that hurt him. He felt maybe a little bit betrayed by that.
Yeah.
Also, Alexander Mercouris, I was listening to him last night, had a sort of interesting theory is that Netanyahu approached Trump and his team first about the idea to carry out an attack on Iran because Netanyahu feels like this is the time now that Syria is in chaos. There is, we destroyed the air defenses in there. Now is the time to strike before this comprehensive defensive compact between Russia and Iran is signed. This is the time to do it. This is our window of opportunity. It sounded like Trump wasn't keen on it. And then we find out through this Axios article just a couple weeks ago that that Jake Sullivan was pitching the attack plan to Biden to carry out this attack on Iran. And luckily, Biden said no. We still have a week. Let's see if anything happens. But that angered Trump greatly. He said, I told you no, and then you tried to use your tools to push this strike with the current president because he still has a couple of weeks left. Try to have him do it and then leave a hot steaming mess for me. And that just, I think, may have angered him greatly. Do you think that's an accurate potential accounting of what happened?
Yeah, it's I guess he would admit that it's speculation, but I think it's reasonable speculation. It just may be true. And yeah, I guess the great question about Trump is like what is motivating him? Is it just kind of like personal animus? He's just like this damn backstabber, or is it actually policy? I mean, is it that he does not want a war? I hope it's the latter. I'm just not confident that it is. We'll see. Yeah, he may be right. But again, I would point to all those forces that already exist and that, that surround him. And I think Alexander Mercouris would agree that it's still an open question, whether or not he'll be able to withstand those forces in the medium or long term. So, right now he wants Netanyahu to stew in his own juices for a little bit, learn his lesson, be more respectful to me. But he may, they may join forces in the not so distant future.
Maybe I'm just thinking, I was saying that Jake Sullivan was the one really, from my understanding, was the one that was pushing Biden to do this attack on Iran. They're discussing it. Mm-hmm. And it makes me wonder if people like Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, would it be correct to characterize them as really servants of the Israeli government more so than the U.S. government? I mean, from my
Yeah.
understanding, it was like that this that the
Yeah.
that they were this attack plan was being pushed, but it was really coming from the Israelis. So
Yeah.
did the
Yeah. Well,
Israelis
right.
phone up Jake Sullivan and Anthony
Yeah.
Blinken, and then
I'm afraid
Anthony
it's true.
Blinken.
Again, yeah. I mean, again, we've talked about like the Iraq War and the research that Mearsheimer did, and that's what the conclusion that he reached. He and Stephen Waltz. Um, yeah, because you stop and think about it. Like, what's in it for the Americans? Iran does not present any kind of threat to the United States. Let's just be honest about that. We had a difference with them, way back in the late '70s, and it's a long, long time ago, and we've paid them back many times over in the decades that followed. We have absolutely no reason to attack Iran, and in fact, we have very powerful reasons not to. And I think that those have been. The Pentagon and the intelligence agencies have pointed that out again and again. It is Israel. Israel drives this anti-Iran, this campaign. They've constantly been applying pressure, and they got all kinds of people, within the U.S. government um, that pretty much do their bidding, have ceased to distinguish between American interests and Israeli interests, unfortunately. They've adopted Zionism, and they've just kind of made it part of their own, mental makeup. Yeah, so that's what's happening. I mean, again, it's not in the American interest. It just is not in the American interest to attack Iran.
Yeah, it's really wild. I mean, Anthony Blinken, he when he went to Israel after October 7th, I think the first things he
Right.
said is, "I come to you as a Jew." It's like you're the Secretary of State
Yeah.
of the United
Right.
States of America.
Right. You have to
You
set
are
that
supposed to
aside.
be
Right.
representing Americans. It's like it is so clear that that he's not working for the United States. It's like, or he's not working for the American people. He's got a
Right.
different agenda, and it's amazing to me how our government just became completely populated with people that don't give a damn about people living in America.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable, and I think this could be a good segue just to kind of talk about the California wildfires, just all these natural disasters that have happened in the United States, and we find out the fire hydrants don't have enough water. There were budget cuts to the fire department. My wife, her friend, lost her home in the Maui fires. That
Right.
happened. And FEMA gave out $750. That's it for losing her home and her cars, everything, the whole family, everything wiped out. And then just we're here in Appalachia. We had the flooding, just homes destroyed, just an hour away from us. Just neighborhoods completely devastated. And it seems like we don't have the budget to help the people that are suffering here, that are losing their homes. But whenever there is a check to write to Ukraine or Israel, there's no hesitation. And you can understand the frustration that the American people have when they see these problems at home where they can't even protect themselves from natural disasters. The government doesn't seem to have the budget. And a lot of times people come and say, well, you shouldn't look at it like that. Things are earmarked for certain things and they can't move.
Okay.
And, you don't understand how the system works. The money's actually coming back in and it's helping all of us. Is there any truth to that? I mean, do we all have a right to be outraged because when I see these numbers of when I watch like local news, it's like, oh, we've raised $500,000 the community to help the homeless issue or to help people in need, and people are coming together in their own personal communities, sacrificing their own money to try to support the problems addressing their own communities, as well as paying tons of taxes to the federal government, and we're still $36 trillion in debt. And where's this
Yeah.
money going? When you
Yeah.
look at the numbers, it's just
Right.
like, oh, the budget was cut by 17 million for a whole state of California. It's like 17 million is nothing when you look at 113 billion aid package that was just passed in June. Like make it make sense.
Well, it really doesn't make sense. Yeah, there is real pushback on that. And I think that's something that everybody understands. Um, so the polls show, and you can just see it on in social media. There's a lot of anger. People do make the comparisons. They look at that money that's going overseas, and a lot of them don't have much of an understanding of what's happening in Ukraine or in Palestine. But they do understand that like a government should be taking care of its own first. And when they see that happening, they get angry. Um, and the Republicans, I think, in general, have tapped into that real and I think justified anger. So that's something that again Trump can work with. Hopefully, if he's very, uh, if he deals with this skillfully, I think he would play up these things and say, look, Ukraine is not our problem, and whatever the Democrats have wasted, 100, $200 billion on Ukraine. Look what's happening to our own country. And the fact is they failed. The Ukrainians are losing and are going to lose. He could make, I hope you're right, and he goes up and he takes on the establishment. He's not afraid of, the criticisms that will come. They'll call him a loser and afraid and a Putin stooge. And maybe he can pull it off because there is that's something that people understand. I think the vast majority of people don't really know what Ukraine is and couldn't tell you, couldn't find it on a map. And, just like they couldn't explain the difference between a Shia and Sunni in the Middle East. And apparently George W. Bush didn't even know the difference, before he launched his invasion. It's crazy. They couldn't tell you, had no idea that there are, Russians within Ukraine and or any of this, right? But they don't need to know it. They just know it's wrong to be sending that money there. And I think that is something, that's one card that Trump has to play, and hopefully he'll play it.
Okay. Well, are you a little bit more positive for 2025, or do we just have a lot more chaos and death and destruction in
I
our
think
future?
probably, well, I'm expecting a lot more chaos, death, and destruction, unfortunately. I guess I would have to say, and actually Jeffrey Sachs himself said this. Jeffrey Sachs is no fan of Trump. I'm not a fan of Trump either. But he said that with Biden, there was no hope. It was clear that he was always going to give the Israelis what they wanted. But he said with Trump, he said probably we're going to be disappointed and we're going to get more of the same. And I think he's right. I mean, that's been the history. The deep state wins out in these kind of contests. But he says there's at least hope with Trump. And I'll admit that. So there is some hope.
I think one of the things that gives me hope now is that the deep state, it's real. If I talked about it, I never think it was a real thing. Growing up, you had faith in all these institutions.
Yeah.
And now
right.
just to me, it's just so apparent that the deep state, it's a
well,
real
that's
thing.
Yeah, no, it's quite extraordinary. I remember when I was young, when you talked about the deep state, you were talking about Turkey. I mean, seriously, that's where that term deep state was associated with Turkey. Because I remember that Turkey went through kind of, it seemed like every few years there was a coup or, some new leader was installed. But they said nothing really changed because it's the deep state. It was really based within the Turkish military, really controlled things. Mm-hmm. And the president was just a figurehead. And nobody, only a few wacko conspiracy theorists would say that about the U.S. until Trump came along. Really, I think Trump did it more than anybody else, just because he kind of he provoked such, this Trump derangement syndrome that his opponents just went to such extremes that they kind of lost their sense of caution and just came out in the open, and everybody saw it. They saw the Russia hoax and all kinds of things. And so now, everybody talks about the deep state. It's just a known fact.
Right. And so the fact that it's now a known fact that there's just unelected bureaucrats that are kind of running the government and they have their own globalist agenda.
Yeah. Right. And then we saw, we had Dementia Joe in charge. Clearly this guy was not capable of running anything. He probably wouldn't be able to run the recreation room in an old folks home. But he was supposed to be the president of the U.S., but still, somebody clearly was running it. It wasn't him. So, it's just like everybody said, well, clearly the deep state's in charge. Just relax,
Yeah. No, it's so unbelievable. That I think we've come acclimated to it. Just how insane the past.
No, it's right. Yeah. That's right. Just go back 10 years. Well, certainly before 2016. It's just that, we have seen a real revolution in perception, let's say,
Yeah,
Yeah,
U.S.
I think that,
perception. It's just
right,
the cat's out of the bag. So it's
right,
just to me that it's unsustainable. The current government, it's exposed. Everybody's like, democracy is becoming a joke now. The
yeah,
idea of a democracy, and
yeah,
across all of Western Europe. So it's just the whole thing
yeah.
is
Well,
crumbling down. I
I just
feel.
have to see. I saw this story. It was the former EC commissioner. I think it was Thierry Bertrand. I think was his name. But he said, he basically threatened the Germans, don't you dare elect the AfD. If you do that, you saw what we did in Romania. This is what he said openly. We'll do it to you. In other words, we'll ban you, annul your election. And it's just, oh, okay, yeah.
Oh,
So
welcome to Western democracy.
exactly.
No.
I know. The fact that they don't have any sort of sense of shame or self-awareness, it's just extraordinary. But that's what's happened. I mean, it really has. And that's new. People didn't say those kind of things when I was young or even 15 years ago.
Right. I mean, that's why I think that we're in a different time. And you are right. The deep state used to always come out and win, and it got its way. But people are onto it now, and they're getting onto it more and more quickly. And we saw calls for the AfD to restore the energy pipeline. If they do that, and if they go through and they restore relations with Russia and this thing, the whole thing will break apart. Right. I mean, it's just like.
Yeah, well,
Who's in charge now?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, because Germany is so important. Germany is the heart of the European Union. And so if Germany does flip, goes to a true dissident party, that's going to have monumental repercussions. But I think that's also, you saw the resistance to that, with the former commissioner saying that we are not going to let that happen. So that's what we're looking at. I think that's what we're seeing in Europe, and that's the future of Europe. It's a fight between, let's call them, what we call them, authoritarian Democrats.
Authoritarian democracy.
Yeah, against populist democracy.
Right. Or yeah, but they're framed as the authoritarian or the far right. The second coming of Hitler.
Right.
Is
The ones that are trying to come to power through the ballot box, right? These are the people we have to stop, using extra constitutional means.
Yeah. Well, when is that election? I think that'll be a very interesting date.
I think it's February 23rd.
February 23rd.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I know that it's actually the Christian Democrats are favored, but apparently there's separate elections for party, I guess for representatives for the parties, and then for the chancellor. And the AfD woman is favored to win actually the chancellor election, to come in first. And then I think the AfD is expected to come in second in the general elections. And, they should really have a share in the government, but that all these parties will work to keep them out. That's
right.
But there may be some point where they get past, 50, I think they're around 30% now, the AfD.
Yeah.
But if they get, and they still have a ways to go, to get to 50%. And then it would be nice, of course, if like Sarah Wagenknecht's party could cooperate with them. I think at this point they still refuse to, but it seems to me that they have a lot in common. The most important things they actually agree on. If that would increase the chances of a true dissident government.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think one thing we've learned is polling can't really be trusted that much. We've seen it here that I think a lot of times the association with far right, now everything's become far right, will often let people, even on anonymous polling, not want to admit that, for example, they support a candidate like Trump.
Right.
And that's why we saw, against Hillary Clinton, Clinton was favored heavily to win, and they tried to make the polling here between Kamala and Trump very close when it clearly wasn't. So we'll see. I think that there's always a little under self-reporting if you are a supporter of the AfD, because people don't want to be associated with.
Right. I think we probably need to end it here. I think I hear your mother trying to get into the room. We're in,
all right.
in a hotel in a state park in Georgia. So anyway, we'll be back at our usual surroundings on Wednesday.
Okay, yeah. Well, we've got all of our. We'll leave it there. Okay, you and Mom have a good time. All right.
We'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.